Welcome, welcome to a very special Breakpoint. I'm your host, Paul Crouch Jr. You know, in the New Testament, there's a guy named Paul, and he had a very dramatic event take place on the road to Damascus. And we think, oh, that was 2,000 years ago. Things like that don't happen anymore, but I promise you, they do. You know, today's guest I want to introduce you to has had one of the most dramatic life turnarounds I think I've ever heard about or experienced, and I want to introduce him right now. Michael Franzese, how are you, my friend?
How are you, Paul?
I mean, would you agree? I mean, Damascus Roads, Apostle Paul, I mean, your life is very different than it was maybe 30, 40 years ago.
Oh, no doubt about it. I mean, you know, Paul has been my my inspiration, I would say, to know that what God can do in someone's life, no doubt.
Yeah. Well, Michael's written a book, and I was telling him earlier, I'm not a huge book reader. Certain books capture me, and I will usually read them cover to cover. But the book Blood Covenant by Michael Franzese is absolutely fascinating. It's a book on Michael's life, and it gets into some of the very intimate details of his conversion. But really, it got into the life of the mob. We've all heard that term mob, mobster. You know, everybody knows about Vito Corleone and the Godfather. And I mean, is that real? I mean, come on, let's talk about that a little bit.
Well, you know, I mean, in terms of mob movies, I think The Godfather was definitely, you know, the greatest. Godfather 1 and 2.
Wow.
3, they kind of lost it. But it was fictional, but the sense of the mob was captured well in that movie. In that it is a very secret life. It's a life that's allegedly built on honor and respect. And you have some very, very tight policies that you must follow. And, you know, it's a real thing. A lot of people think that, no, this is a movie and it's not real life, but it's a real way of life.
Yeah.
It's not a business, it's a whole way of life.
Yeah. Your father was Sonny Franzese.
Yes.
And, you know, many people know that name from the news or from newspapers. Talk about him a little bit.
Well, my dad was the underboss of the Colombo family, one of the 5 New York Mafia, La Cosa Nostra families, and he was a very prominent figure in that life. Back in the 1960s, he was to that life what John Gotti was in the 80s and 90s.
Wow.
I mean, he was the guy. Tremendous law enforcement scrutiny, and you know, I grew up in that. I mean, we had police and law enforcement around us all the time because he was such a target. So I grew up in that atmosphere. I grew up actually hating the police because of it, because I loved my father, I idolized him. And you know, he was, I think you probably know this, he passed away this February at 103 years old.
Goodness.
The oldest living mob guy in the world, I'm told, certainly in the United States.
Wow.
But he was a guy that stood by the oath 100%, would never violate that oath in any which way. He received a 50-year prison sentence as a result of conviction in federal court. He did 40 years on that 50 and never once broke his oath or broke his silence. So he was probably the last of, you know, that breed of mob guys, I would think. And he had a powerful influence on me growing up, no doubt.
Well, you were adopted, correct?
At a young age, yes.
Yeah. But you loved your father. You idolized him in many ways. I mean, talk about that.
Well, you know, my mom was 16 when I was born.
Yeah.
And, you know, the only father I really knew was Sonny Franzese. I mean, they got together 2 or 3 years later. As a matter of fact, I grew up thinking at one point that I was adopted, and then another point, my mother revealed to me that he was my real father. Honestly, Paul, I don't even know.
Okay.
He has never said to me that he was, you know, that I was adopted. For me, I'm his son, and he brought me up that way, and that was it. But, you know, he was just such a powerful figure in the house that I just idolized him. He was a great father, and I looked up to him in many ways.
And the Italian culture as a whole is very family-oriented, very tight. I mean, that was even represented in some of these movies, that the kids love their parents. Was that the case in your family?
Yeah, you know, me especially, I think for some reason, I think I was my dad's favorite, you know, even though I was one of 7. and he treated us all well. But I was the one that really paid attention to him, I would say. And it was a result of his conviction that caused me to become a member of that life.
Right.
Because before that, I was going to school. I was going to be a doctor. I was a pre-med student. He gets convicted, sentenced to 50 years in prison, and my thought was the only way to help him out was to get on the street and help him.
Yeah. When did you kind of realize at a young age that your dad was doing something different than maybe your friends' dads, that he was not necessarily, working a regular 9-to-5 job?
I'll tell you my first real glimpse of that. Back in the late 50s, early 60s, there was a war in the Colombo family. It was actually the Gallo-Profaci War. It was before Joe Colombo took over. And I remember one time, Paul, my dad had been away for a couple of days during this war. It was dangerous.
Wow.
And he had come home early in the morning. He hadn't shaved. I was about 4 or 5 years old. I was sitting on the step, the stairway, and I remember my dad coming in, hugging my mom. My mom was crying, and there was somebody, a good friend of my dad's, another soldier, was out on the porch with a gun, making sure that nobody had seen my dad come in the house. I was 4 or 5 years old, and I still today I remember that vividly.
Wow.
You don't forget something like that. So that's when I knew there was something else going on.
Yeah. When did you, like you said, want to be part of it or get involved? I think you did it out of loyalty to your dad to try to help him in many ways, right?
Yeah, what happened when he when he first went to prison on this bank robbery case, he told me he was innocent. I was a pre-med student at Hofstra University. I had gotten very close to Joe Colombo at that time. He had this Italian-American Civil Rights League. We were picking in the FBI. I saw it as a way to help my dad. I lost interest in school, and I went to see Dad in Leavenworth Penitentiary. We were in the visiting room, and I said, Dad, I'm not going to school anymore. If I don't help you out, you're going to die in here. 50-year sentence. And that's when he said to me, if you're going to be on the street, I want you to do it the right way. And he proposed me for membership at that point in time.
Talk about that, because that obviously is where the title Blood Covenant comes from, is this secret, I don't know, like almost like a little church service that you have to become a made man with, I don't know, blood and fire and the Virgin Mary. I mean, talk about that. That was fascinating.
Well, I was a recruit for about 2 years where I proved myself worthy to become a member of that life. And then it was Halloween night, 1975. Myself and 5 other gentlemen were called into a room individually. The boss was seated at the head of a horseshoe configuration, the underboss consigliere to his left and right, and all the capo regimes or captains were alongside of them. And it was a very solemn ceremony, dimly lit room, late at night. They wanted you to understand the seriousness of it, and it was intense. So I walked down the aisle, stood in front of the boss, held out my hand. He took a knife right here, cut my finger. Some blood dropped on the floor. This is a blood oath. Then I cupped my hands, took a picture of a saint. It was a Catholic altar card, put it on my hands, lit it aflame. Didn't hurt, it burned quickly, it was merely symbolic. And he said to me that night, tonight, Michael Franzese, you are born again. That's the term that he used. Into a new life, into La Cosa Nostra. He said, violate what you know about this life, betray your brothers, and you will die and burn in hell like the saint is burning in your hands. He said, do you accept? And I said, yes, I do.
Yeah.
That's the oath.
What does La Cosa Nostra mean?
It means this thing of ours. It's kind of the American version of the mafia.
Yeah.
Same thing, basically, but just different term.
Now, part of being in the mafia or the mob is you've got to make money. I mean, you are part businessman, but many of the businesses, I think, were legitimate businesses. Yes. Many were not, and many skirted that gray area of legitimate, not legitimate. Is that true? I mean, talk about that a little bit.
It's true. When we took that oath, law enforcement was allegedly our enemy.
Yeah.
We didn't mind cutting corners and doing illegal things. It was part of our job.
Yeah.
But we also had legitimate business. Like I had 2 automobile dealerships, I had restaurants, I had a leasing company. Later I had a film production company and distribution. So I had a lot of things going on. But I also was lending money at usurious rates. Yeah. I also had a number of bookmakers that worked for me, taking bets illegally. And then, you know, I came across a deal where basically I was a wholesaler for gasoline, and I was defrauding the government out of tax on every gallon of gasoline.
Got it. Okay.
And I came across that and ran that operation for about 8 years. I had over 350 gas stations that I owned or operated. I had 18 companies licensed to collect the tax on every gallon of gasoline. And over an 8-year period, we were selling 500 million gallons of gas a month, and we were taking down 30 or 40 cents a gallon. So if you do the math, it was a tremendous amount of money.
Now, you dealt with law enforcement too. You got arrested. You went to prison. I mean,
Yes.
it's not all, you know, roses as you're dealing with being in the mob. I mean, talk about that.
Well, during my, you know, 25 years in that life, I had, I believe, 17 or 18 arrests. I was indicted 7 times. I had 2 federal racketeering cases, one brought on by Rudy Giuliani.
Wow.
I was acquitted in that case, or I wouldn't be sitting here today. I was facing 100 years. And I ultimately took a plea to a racketeering case. The underlying act was tax fraud, and I was sentenced to 10 years in prison.
Wow.
I had a $15 million fine and restitution. I had $5 million in forfeitures, and I did 8 years in prison on that 10, which was the maximum.
Yeah.
So,
Prison. What's that like?
well, you know, it's funny. I've been asked a lot about that during this whole quarantine that we've been under, and honestly, for me, Paul, quarantine is a walk in the park compared to prison. You know, I spent, the toughest part for me, I spent almost 3 years in solitary. The government was mad at me. They were trying to get me to cooperate, and they kept me in the hole in lockdown 24/7, 7 days a week.
And they're trying to get you to rat out other people, right?
Yeah,
Is
yeah,
that
they wanted me to cooperate. And,
Yeah.
you know, they said it was administrative detention because I had left the life. There was a contract on my life, so they kept me locked down as a result of that. And that was difficult. I can tell you, I learned through that experience, we weren't meant to be solo creatures. We were meant to be social.
Amen.
And, but it was during that time, Paul, that I started to read my Bible, and I really started to have this relationship with Jesus because I had nowhere else to turn.
Wow.
So for me, it was a life-saving experience because I came to the Lord during that time.
Wow. Amazing. Talk about today. I mean, does the mob exist today? Is it the same? Is it different? Has it gone legit? Is it all underground? I mean, what do you know?
It still exists today. It's not going to go away in my lifetime. It's different. It doesn't have the same power, authority that it once had because, you know, when the government really cracked down in the 80s, they took away a lot of the union influence that we had, and they really put a dent in it. They put a lot of the old timers away forever. Most of them are dead or in prison for the rest of their life. So it's the same structure, but it doesn't have the same authority and power that it once had.
Yeah. Talk about, again, probably, it seemed like your time in prison was, you know, the Lord revealed to himself to you in a small way, but what really brought you to faith? What finally, you know, brought you to the point that, you know, this I've got to change?
Well, you know, I met a young woman. You know, she was 20 years old on a movie that I was producing. She was a dancer in the film. I fell in love with her, and her mom were strong Christians. Her mom especially.
Wow.
Her mom was the most godly woman I ever met in my life. I mean, I believe that woman prayed me to where I am. She was a prayer warrior.
Yeah.
And I realized, Paul, at that point that if I was going to have this young girl in my life, I needed to make some changes.
Yeah.
And I knew she couldn't accept my lifestyle because it was a total contradiction to what they believed. So it was a result of that I was willing to listen about the Lord. But it didn't really sink in until I hit bottom in prison.
Right.
And I realized that I may spend the rest of my life here. What my mother-in-law and my wife were telling me, if there's some truth to it, I want to know.
Yeah.
And, you know, I always tell people this. I came to Christ differently. I challenged God. I didn't just come into the fold because evidence has played a major part in my life. I've been to trial 5 times.
Right.
I've been to so many grand juries, parole hearings. So evidence is major to me.
Yeah.
You know, you got to show me things. And when I approached the Bible and my faith, I approached it in those terms, looking for the evidence.
Yeah.
And I came away believing there's more evidence to prove that the Bible is God's word and that Jesus is my Savior than anything else I've ever seen in my life.
Yeah, there's a lot of books that, you know, put Jesus on trial.
Yeah.
You know, the case for Christ and different things like that, that Jesus is either who he says he is, or he's the greatest lunatic
Absolutely.
that ever existed.
There's no gray area.
Yeah.
It's black and white.
Take me to the point, what was it, alone on your knees? I mean, really paint a picture of your conversion and what really made sense.
You know, the first night in there, they told me I'd never see the light of day again. They told my wife, your husband's gone forever. They put me in the hole. I was 39 years old, and I said, this is it for the rest of my life.
Wow.
I was laying on the cot. Honestly, Paul, you know, I used to demean people that were suicidal.
Yeah.
I called them weak. You can't face up to your troubles, you're weak.
Yeah.
After that night, I don't do that anymore because I wasn't brave enough to commit suicide.
Yeah.
But I wanted to lay my head on that cot and not wake up. It was just too painful to think of my future, of the loss of everything that was dear to me.
Yeah.
And I'm lying there, and I just wanted to die.
Wow.
And a prison guard walked by my cell, and he looked in on me, and he said, Franzese, you don't look good. Are you okay? And I said, get away from me. I chased him away. I said, I don't want to see any of you guys tonight. Leave me alone.
Yeah.
And he came back about a minute later, pushes something through the slot on the door. I hear a thump. I look down. It was a Bible.
Oh,
And
man.
I picked up the Bible. I jumped off the cot, picked it up, and I slammed it against the wall. I didn't want to hear about the Bible or God
Yeah.
or anything else. But then, you know, it took me about a minute. And I remember this vividly. And I said, you know what? It's just me and God in this cell, nobody else. And I picked up the book, and I said, hey, God, if you're here, help me out, man. I need some help. And I opened the book. I didn't even know where to begin. I never read the Bible. I didn't care. I figured I
Yeah.
was my own guy. And it falls open to the book of Proverbs, just by coincidence. And I start reading it, and you know, analytical guy, evidence, and I said, wow, this is a brilliant book. Solomon is brilliant. And so it kind of took me out of where I was for those couple of moments. And then I came across a verse that just knocked me cold. It was Proverbs 16:7. When a man's ways are pleasing to the Lord, even his enemies are at peace with him.
Wow.
And I had nothing but enemies that night.
Wow.
I had the guys on the street looking to kill me. I had the
Yeah.
government wanted to, you know, keep me in here for the rest of my life. I had nothing but enemies. So the enemies thing caught me. And then it kind of brought me back and said, when a man's ways are pleasing to the Lord, and for some reason, Paul, I just was convicted. I said,
Wow.
like, who are you kidding? I've been a criminal, you know, half my life. And it just got to me for some reason, and I started to read on, and I came to a verse that's really become the verse of my life. And it was as a result of this verse that I challenged God. But it was Proverbs chapter 3, verses 5 and 6. Trust in the Lord with all your heart. Lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him. And this was what got me. He will make your path straight. So that night I said, you know what, God? I said, I trusted in this life. I trusted my Father. Look where it got me. I said, if you're really God and Jesus is really all, my mother-in-law and my wife are telling me, you got to prove it to me. And I spent the next almost 3 years, 29 months and 7 days to be exact, in that hole. I read my Bible inside out and upside down. If you see my prison Bible, there's more of my notes on there than there is scripture. I first was introduced to Greg Laurie in the hole because I had a Sony Walkman.
Right.
Young kids don't know what that is,
Yeah.
but you know, from our age.
Oh, I
and
do.
I would listen to Greg every day interpret scripture in such a way that was so soothing to me.
Yeah.
And you know, a funny story, when I got out of prison, I wanted to meet Greg Laurie.
Yeah.
So I found out he was in Riverside, and I sent word out, hey, I want to meet Greg, and they asked me who I was. Greg got scared. He said, so the mob is looking for me.
You wanted to hug him, not shoot him.
Yeah, and I finally met him. We've become dear friends since then, but it was during that prison time that my conversion became real. And over the last 24 years, God has only, you know, impacted me more and more
Yeah.
and more.
Well, I see it because I've known you for many years, and I just, every time we meet, I see a fresh, new love for the Lord, and I see it in your eyes. The eyes truly are the windows to the soul. But I know you've had many friends and family members that were killed or disappeared or, you know, rubbed out, whatever you want to call it. I mean, why are you not dead? Why haven't you been dealt with, as they say?
You know, Paul, contract on my life, my former boss, Carmine Persico, who died last March, he was doing life in prison. And he was extremely upset with me when I walked away. He took it very personal. And as a result, the word was out on me. But you know, again, God had a different plan and a purpose, but I like to tell people this. I believe God prepared me for what was coming in my life.
That's good.
I had an event one night where one of the horrors of that life, Paul, you make a mistake, your best friend walks you into a room, you don't walk out again. And I experienced that, you know, as a captain in that life, I experienced that, and I got that walk one night where I thought I wasn't walking out of that room. And I was scared. I mean, walking into that basement apartment, my knees got weak, my heart was thumping. I was scared, but I didn't run, and it showed me I could face death if I needed to. So God prepared me in a lot of ways for what was coming in my life. I didn't even realize it then. But you know, so the spiritual reason is God had a different purpose for me. The practical reason is that I knew intimately well what my guys would do and what they wouldn't do. I knew I couldn't stay in New York, so I moved out to California. It's one thing to walk somebody into a room, it's another thing to send a hit squad and try to kill somebody and then get away with it when somebody is prepared and waiting. So I changed my whole lifestyle. What do I mean? I didn't go to the same restaurant every Tuesday night. I didn't walk my dog every morning at 7 o'clock. I didn't create any patterns in my life.
Right.
And I was always watching. And Paul, over the last 25 years, everybody I knew is either dead or in prison for the rest of their life. There's nobody left of my era.
Wow.
You know, I don't know if you know this, but Fortune magazine in 1986 wrote a huge article, 50 biggest and most powerful mob bosses.
I remember seeing it.
They featured 6 of us. I was one of the 6. I was the youngest guy on the list. Well, out of that 50 today, 49 of them are dead.
Jesus, that is.
And here I am.
God's protection.
That's God's. There's no other reason for that.
Yeah.
Because I never sold my former associates short, Paul. But God had His hand in this.
Well, if you're just joining us, we're talking to Michael Franzese. He's got an unbelievable book called Blood Covenant. And it's his life story. It's him coming, you know, out of the mafia, out of the mob. And obviously, we're just touching on the highlights of his story. There's so much more detail in the book. I highly suggest you get it. But to see, you know, it never ceases to amaze me, Michael, because I've seen it with, you know, drug addicts or people that, you know, had been addicted to alcohol or all kinds of lifestyle choices, you know, in their early life, and what God has brought them through. Wonderful black bishop that I've interviewed many times that just hated white men. You know, in his early, he grew up in the South, and his heart was so embittered with hate.
Right.
Just hated white. It doesn't matter what, you know, what color of white you were, but hate absorbed his soul. But Christ turned him around, can turn a drug addict around, can turn lives around. Does that blow your mind to see, you know, people's lives changed by the power of Jesus Christ?
Well, I'll tell you, people think I have a fascinating testimony, and to me, it's my life, and I'm very thankful for God for everything He's done for me. But over the past 24 years, I've witnessed conversions that are just mind-blowing. So much, to me, more fascinating than my own. And God continues to work in people's lives on a daily basis. And, you know, that's my message to everyone. Turn towards the Lord, not away from Him, and give Him time. In His time, if you hang in there with Him, you'll see life-changing experiences like no one else can give you.
Yeah. You mentioned your father, and he was in prison for 40 years?
Yes.
He got out, what, a year or two before he passed away?
2017, he was released.
Yeah.
At the age of 100.
Unbelievable. When he came out, clearly he came out a different man. Did you have some of those father-son heart-to-heart talks after he got out about, you know, life? Was it worth it? Did you talk to him about the Lord? What was your interaction the last year or two?
You know, 2 things. I mean, I do harbor a little maybe it's guilt is the word, because I don't know if I specifically was able to lead my dad to Christ. We did talk about it. Very hard to talk to him about it because he was very old school, and he just believed that he was a good guy. My father had a problem understanding how destructive that life was to our family.
Right.
And it was very destructive. I mean, my mom, 33 years without a husband. When she passed away in 2012, her relationship with my dad could only be described as ugly.
Right.
Because she blamed him for everything that went wrong.
Gotcha.
What went wrong? I had a sister that died of an overdose of drugs. Brother, drug addict, 25 years, contracted the HIV virus. Another sister died young of cancer. Our family was a mess. And that's true of every family, of every member of that life that I know of. It's a very destructive life. And my father had a difficult time admitting to that because he said, you know, I was framed, I was innocent, I didn't commit this crime. And I used to say, Dad, I know you were framed, but you weren't framed because you were a doctor, a lawyer, or a priest. You're a mob guy like me. This is part of the life. We have to accept it.
Yeah.
And he couldn't deal with that. So, but you know, the saving grace for me is that over the past 20 years, I have had thousands upon thousands of people praying for my dad, for his conversion.
Thank God.
And I believe in the power of prayer.
Amen.
And I also sent a young chaplain, a woman who just took to my dad's and my story, and she went in to visit my father and said that he accepted Christ during that visit. So
Praise God.
that was reassuring to me.
He was, I'm sure, as you were, raised Catholic, right?
Yes.
And so he knew the sacraments, he knew communion, he knew about Jesus, I think from a head knowledge.
Correct.
But it's the heart knowledge that you want to kind of had to deal with.
Yeah.
Did he ever, in the last year or two, ever admit, maybe I was wrong, or, regrets, talk about regrets, anything like that?
He had a very hard time admitting what the result of his membership in that life was for himself and his family. He had a difficult time, and I don't know why.
Yeah.
And I said to him, when I left the life, he was upset. We didn't talk for 10 years. The government told me he went along with the contract on my life. And, even my wife has a problem with that. She was worried whenever I was with my dad. And I said, look, my dad might have went along with it, but my dad would have never hurt me. I don't believe that.
Right.
But I said to him, he said, why did you do that? And I said, Dad, we have a different of opinion. I'm not going to destroy my family as a result of this life, and you didn't have a problem doing that, and I understand your mentality. It's not right, but I get it.
Right.
So that's where we differed. I said I wasn't looking to hurt anybody. I'm not going to cooperate with the government and put people in jail. That wasn't my thing, but I needed to get away for my family's sake and for my sake. And I think he accepted that, because if he didn't, we would have never had the relationship we had right up until he died.
Yeah, amazing. What are you doing today? Talk about, I know I see you often speaking at different events. I've heard you on Jim Rome's radio program. I know you talk about gambling and different business things. Give me an update on today.
Well, I've been speaking, sharing my testimony over the past 24 years all over the world, Paul. God has really honored the ministry in that way. Very prolific in that regard. And I also do a lot of corporate events. I work with Major League Baseball, the NCAA, visited over 350 universities, student athletes, talked to them about the dangers of gambling and the relationships that they keep. And most recently, I'm something that I've been approached for over the years, to actually be a life skills coach, a business coach. And I never took it seriously until recently. And now I do it anyway, because I have so many people coming to me asking my advice. So now we're formally in that project, and we created a website, michaelfranzese.com. And I've been very blessed that a lot of people have jumped on board. So we're sharing a lot of information about life. And, so many people are struggling, Paul, today. They have different challenges and struggles in their life. And look, I've been through a lot. I mean, you name it practically, I've been through it. So, and I love helping people and encouraging people. So that's what we're doing.
Well, with this program, as you know, we've done this several times. I want you to take a minute and just look right into that camera. And I know there's young people that are maybe enamored by, choices that are coming up that maybe not wise choices, or struggling with money or gambling or alcohol or whatever. I mean, we are in a very broken world, in a broken condition, but we know that the Lord has answers to some of those questions, which you've painfully learned through many, many years. But just talk to people that are watching about the Jesus you know about.
Yes, well, I found out one thing, and you are who you hang out with in this life. You are who you are accountable to in this life. And at one time I was accountable to my superiors in the mob, the oath that I took, and it really led me and everybody that I know that was part of that life in the wrong direction. Well, at some point in time, I was so blessed that the Lord came into my life and I became accountable to Jesus Christ and to people that love the Lord, my wife, my children,
Amen.
Paul, a dear friend. We become accountable to do the right things in our life. And when you turn to Jesus, people, I tell people all the time, I visit prisons and I speak to inmates, and they tell me they want to change. And I tell them change is temporary, but transformation through Jesus Christ is permanent.
Wow.
And that's how you need to have a relationship with Jesus, so that he can work from the inside out.
Amen.
So it's not a struggle for you to do the right thing anymore, because it's Jesus working through you. He does the work for you. So here's my advice. You have to have a relationship with Jesus. You have to allow him to transform you, and you have to be accountable to him, and you will see the life-changing difference that he will make for you. And then you got all of eternity to gain as a result. So, I am so confident in that message, because of what he's done in my life and what I've seen him do in others' lives, that I just have to repeat it all over the world. And you know what? People are not offended by it.
Yeah.
They want to hear it, because there's so many struggles and challenges that are people going through today, and they don't have the answer.
Yeah. No, I agree. And what I love about you, Michael, is you can talk to, a bunch of evangelicals at a church, but you can also talk to Fortune 500 company presidents too. You cross over into these two worlds, which I think gives you a very unique opportunity to be a light. And the Bible says that we are to be a witness. Right. We don't have to be a soul winner. The Bible never says go out into all the world and be a soul winner. It says go into the world and be a witness. And that's what Michael is. He's a light in a very many times dark world. I think probably the darkest area you probably have to deal with, I think, would be gambling and some of the point shaving. Does that still around?
Oh yeah, I mean, gambling is alive and well, and it's bigger today than it was in my day, because you have more access now.
True.
And when you have access to things that are harmful to you, it gets out of control.
Yeah.
And you'd be surprised, Paul. I've seen more people struggle with gambling addiction than I have for alcohol or drugs. Wow. Of course, the scary thing now is this opioid it's just so out of control. It's horrible what it's doing in people's lives, but they turn there instead of to the Lord.
Yeah, exactly.
And they get destruction there instead of revival with Jesus.
Amen. Well, thank you, my friend. I mean, every time we talk, I learn something new, and I get inspired, and I think, we should all be inspired to see what the Lord can do in people's lives. You are hurting, you may be struggling, you're fighting something. All of our families are in discord in one way or another, and but we do know and have the answers, and it's in Jesus Christ. It's not in religion, it's not in Catholicism, it's not in Protestantism, it's not in any ism. It's in a very simple relationship with the Lord Jesus Christ. And I love that your conversion started with a simple Bible.
Yeah.
And that's what I would encourage you to do. Just, if you're hurting, if you don't know where to turn, just find a Bible. You can find a Bible somewhere online. There's 1 million Bibles online. And just start to read, start to learn about this man named Jesus Christ. And I think at some point he will connect with you and can help you and turn your life around. Thank you again.
Thank you, Paul.
Wonderful, wonderful words. We'll do this again. And Michael's got some wonderful projects coming up. You've got seminars, teachings.
Yes.
Again, touch on that one more time.
Yeah, this whole life coaching and business coaching, I enjoy the life skills part of it better than the business part of it, but you know, we have so many people, again, Paul, that are asking, they have questions in their life, experiences that they're going through, whether it be with their family. You know, people ask me about negotiation all the time in business.
Yeah.
And I tell them, listen, negotiation is part of life.
Yeah.
You negotiate with your wife, your kids, your relatives, your friends. You got to learn how to negotiate, and it'll help you in business end also. But you know, we're just looking to help people along, give them good advice, and help them to be successful and prosperous. And you know, we're kind of I like to look at myself as a sheep in wolf's clothing.
Yeah.
Because we're bringing people to the Lord, you know, in the same way, because that's where they belong.
Well, you know, one of the most unique things too, because my wife and I went with Leon Patillo. For a while, you had a show in Vegas called Mob Story.
Yes.
And it was a lot of Vegas-y stuff with the, you know, the lights and the dancing and all that stuff. But you literally did get to really get up and tell your testimony.
Yes.
And I know people had to have been touched through that.
There's no doubt. It was the first time on a Vegas stage that they heard about a transformation through Jesus Christ, and people weren't offended by it at all. As a matter of fact, it stemmed a lot of curiosity. We got a lot of questions, and we're reviving the show. It's going to be on the Strip if we ever get over this quarantine and people can come and buy tickets. But people should look for it. It's called A Mob Story, and it's going to be at the Mosaic Theater, right across the street from Park MGM.
Yeah, it was fascinating. Like I said, but to see that mix of Vegas and good old testimony, it was kind of mind blowing. But you know, so you know, check it out if you can at some point. But thank you again. And what's the one thing, maybe the most misunderstood thing about the mob when people come up to you? The dumbest thing you've ever had somebody ask
Paul,
you?
It's so hard to answer that because I get so many. I have people now telling me, Michael, I can't make any money. Can you tell me how to join the mob? How do I join? You know, online. You know, they're asking me those questions. Can you introduce me to somebody? I need to make some money. Everybody thinks that, you know, you join the mob and all of a sudden you become wealthy overnight. It's not that way. Trust me.
And during your show, what was interesting, one lady asked about Trump. You know, because you had interaction with Trump back in the day. I mean, good thing, bad. Any thoughts on Trump? This isn't a political show.
Well, let me say this. You know, Trump was not a member of the mob. He didn't associate with us. But what I try to tell people is, in New York during that time, we controlled all the labor unions.
Right.
If you were a contractor, a builder, a developer, you had to deal with us.
Right.
And that was it. So we dealt with Trump in that way. But we didn't socialize with him. He wasn't paying us off or any of that stuff. But, you know, it's funny. I'll end it with this. I had a Russian partner. And back in 1983-84, we bought, in Trump Towers, we bought a couple of condos. We paid $6 million for them. Okay, this was almost 40 years ago. Do you know that during the whole Mueller investigation, they came and questioned me about that? His relationship with Russia? Through my partner who was Russian.
Gosh, that's right.
I said, you guys are kidding me.
Yeah.
I said, we just bought some condos. He didn't even know who the guy was.
Yeah.
That's how far they stretched with that.
Well, the Trump thing will be a whole nother show and a whole other discussion, because I'm actually working on a documentary on Trump, which, again, we'll talk about later. But again, thank you for joining me today for this very special look into a life transformed. Really, that's what it's about, and it never ceases to amaze me how the Lord can take somebody that's heading down one road and bring them down another. Thank you for joining me. We'll do this again. God bless you, and we'll see you next time.
Great.